if we were to design iManage today with everything that we know, how would we do it with all of the tools that we have available today?
Is essentially the new iManage platform basically using the MCP kind of connector and having more integrations with the big large language models and other units? Is it sort of really largely that plus a new interface, or is it more?
When I say we, it's iManage has reinvented itself at least 3 times. And each time, there's a big technological change. We sort of take a step back and say, if we were to design iManage today with everything that we know, how would we do it with all of the tools that we have available today? And we've asked that question a few times and sort of uh, reignited what iManage means to the to the market. And we've asked that very same question over the course of the last year, in the era of Gen AI and agentic AI, and to think about what problems could we solve, where is it that we can remove friction, how is it that we can drive productivity gains that were not possible before because the tech might have not been there or too expensive, or or too hard to get to. AI models are their effectiveness is significantly improved with relevant context, and that context comes from documents and the metadata around documents and the activity around documents, and we've got a lot of that information that we host for customers. And so it's a very interesting um, juxtaposition of what large language models can do. You combine that with the knowledge that you have and the signals in that data. Our goal is, can we significantly improve the effectiveness as well as reduce the risk of using these models, and thereby accelerate adoption within the industry.
So, a couple of questions on that. I mean, one of the data points that you showed was that iManage has got 10 times more users in the last 3 years. Is that largely to do, are the large language models making iManage more necessary and more relevant in a funny sort of way?
Um, there's this. It's certainly true that large language models and AI require or are made more effective with the kind of data that is in iManage, and we've certainly seen an acceleration in demand, where a customer might have started working on an AI rollout and figured out very quickly that if they don't have their data in good shape, it slows them down. Um, so we've seen an acceleration because of that, but we've also seen an acceleration because our cloud platform has matured, and it's given a larger volume of the organizations on around the globe the confidence to move to the cloud because of all of the investment we've made over the years in performance and scale and reliability and security and compliance with the various standards. So I just think that the market in general has gotten more comfortable that this is indeed the benefits and the outweigh the costs and the risks of moving to the cloud.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It is more effective. It's a partnership, I suppose. Really, I suppose for the knowledge worker, it's having your data in a foundation like iManage with the large language model. You talked a lot about the context fabric this
Mhm.
morning. Is that context fabric sort of just basically better tagging and categorization of documents, or is it more than that?
It's the context fabric is um, uh, all of the signals that enable the LLM to reason more effectively. Whether it is trying to find an answer to a question based on prior work, or you're trying to generate something new. I'll use a very simple example. If you're trying to generate some language for an employment agreement, and the employment is in the state of Illinois, um, then knowing that you're pulling language from an employment agreement where the governing law is the state of Illinois is an important nuance. Otherwise, you may end up with legal looking language that is just bad law. So, context is very important to build confidence in the output of what AI produces. And we get you could get context from the metadata. You could extract context, which we are doing through what we call enrichment from what's in the document. So, for example, we look at the document and we extract out the jurisdiction and the governing law and the parties and the type of agreement. All of those are now available to the large language model to use while they reason. You also get context from the activity. So if a document is used a lot or is used by a very senior partner that's known to be an expert on that topic, that tells you something about the value in that information. So it's context. It's very similar to human being. Context comes from a variety of different sources, and being able to house that context and make it available to large language models is how we've evolved the platform.
Yeah. So it's interesting. You said it very nicely this morning as well. You said instead of us taking our data to the AI is coming to
That's
the
that's
data.
that's correct. That's the
Yes.
way we like to think about it.
Yeah, no, that's very meaningful to me. I think one of the other things I liked about what you were talking about this morning is how iManage have really tried to unpick the user's experience and actually look at the user's problem. And I suppose thinking about the knowledge worker, your users, what are they going to be doing in 2 to 3 years' time? Because you're adapting what they're going to be doing sort of today and maybe for the next 6 months, 12 months. As you said this morning, it's a journey. But have you got any kind of insights, thoughts, imaginations about what the knowledge worker looks like in 3 years' time?
Uh, I'll attempt to answer that question. It is going to be speculative, and I'm probably going to extrapolate our own experience, because I think AI has impacted software development probably ahead of almost any other field. Um, uh, on the one hand, you are going to see productivity gains for certain. You can do things that would take you much longer. Previously, you can do it in a much shorter time. Um, on the other hand, I think what's happening in the rest of the economy is uh, the volume and the velocity of work are increasing. So you're going to have a bigger influx of legal work.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can tackle that work more efficiently, ultimately your top line increases, but you're delivering it at a potentially with greater efficiency, and as a result, you're able to handle more of that work, and everybody's happy. You're happy because you're getting more work, but you're doing it more efficiently, and the customer is happy because, or the client is happy because all of that work that you're doing for them is resulting in greater growth, greater profits, whatever it is.
So you don't necessarily see a huge headcount reduction or knowledge workers only working 3 days a week, spending the other 3 days on the golf course, whatever they want to do.
So if productivity goes up, uh, it should result in more demand,
Mm.
and that greater demand is going to result in more legal services, and the people that win are the folks that can deliver those legal services at the velocity that their competitors are able to do so. So the shape will change, but um, there's going to be a transition that happens. I can't guarantee that it won't be painful to go through that transition, but if you stay stuck in the sand, perhaps it would be more painful than if you roll with the wind.
Yeah. Okay, last question. So we were talking about tokens this morning. You very in passing, you said that it could bring that using iManage properly could potentially bring down the cost of AI usage. I mean, can you expand on that? Is
Sure.
that a possibility?
Yeah, it's certainly a more than a possibility. I'm quite. It's one question that I'm quite certain about that it will. And the reason is, the if you are using more relevant context, it reduces the number of round trips that the LLM has to make to ultimately formulate the response, because you're giving it just far more uh, a smaller set of what I would call curated data to work on versus the whole universe of whatever it's been trained on. And there's multiple academic papers on this on this topic. So that will reduce token bloat. Providing context windows are also not infinite. So providing a more narrower context for the specific question at hand that the LLM is dealing with, will reduce the size of the context window that you need, and will improve the quality of the response.
So less prompting, more effective agents, and better results. And
more relevant responses.
nice
What
passes.
what are you getting?
So for me, I guess it's this idea, I suppose when generative AI came out and we were thinking it can just take our unstructured data and make a beautiful analysis out of it. It's a little bit like, I guess we've got to make sure that our houses are tidy before we can have a party. So
Yeah, that's a pretty nice way to put it. We've certainly seen organizations that have um, not just had document management, but had a good discipline around using it.
yes.
To be further along
Yeah.
the adoption curve, because what happens is they get better responses that the lawyers end up trusting, because it says this thing appears to know what it's doing, and that builds trust and confidence, and the trust and confidence then becomes this virtuous cycle of I'm adopting more and more of it. But if you don't have your data in decent shape, um, the reliability of the response will vary more.
Yeah.
And the good news is getting your data in good shape is not entirely a manual process.
Yes.
In fact, I think we're using AI to help with that process in the first place.
And that's something iManage is specifically doing.
Yes.
It can help you get your
Exactly.
data into that good shape.
Exactly. So we are, for example, we built custom models that can classify documents based on the agreement type. It can extract out interesting data points from those documents, like governing law or names of parties, the name of court, the name of a judge. And so now when you ask it to do a task or ask a question, and you're looking for a clause, for example, in an employment agreement, it will go and query only the employment agreements rather than all agreements that have the two words employee and agree in it.
Yes.